Hello everyone, I am going to continue reading from I Was a Doctor in Auschwitz, The Beauty Parlor. Every time I pass by a beauty parlor in New York, I stop to watch the young and older women who come out of its door freshly made up, massaged, shampooed, recreated by many clever hands to look their best for their own pleasure and for the admiring eyes of their husband and friends. And every time I see them, I remember another beauty parlor, the one in Auschwitz. Yes, Auschwitz had a beauty parlor too, but its purpose was the exact opposite that of an American beauty parlor. Its purpose was to deprive its unwilling clients of even their last remnants of beauty, freshness, and human appearance. It was one of the typical Nazi jokes, a creation of their devilish imagination, which served to humiliate their victims and make their short remaining lifespan all the more horrible and distressing. The wooden building which stood near the gas chambers had disinfection written on it. Everyone who was sent right to become a camp inmate for a while had to pass through that building. When we entered the first of the filthy rooms inside, we were still human beings, women, wearing our own clothes, our own shoes, our own underwear, and in our hands we still carried the bundle we had brought from home, filled with all that meant so much to us. We still had hair on our heads, and most of us even had hats. Above all, we still had our identity, our individuality, which made us different from the other women around us, and our pride which, as we learned, gets most of its support from our outer appearance. The first room into which we stepped was filled with young SS men. Their eyes shone with expectation, their ape-like movements betrayed an unhealthy, abnormal sexual excitement. There were also some women in this room, in striped prison clothes, with kerchiefs around their heads. They worked fast, without uttering a word. We did not understand their position, not knowing the hierarchy of Auschwitz, but they were the old prisoners, some of them serving their third or fourth year, the beauty operators of the camp. Coarse voices ordered us to undress. Some of us obeyed automatically, too exhausted to resist. Soon we stood naked, our clothes in a heap around our feet. Some of us protested, but our protests were soon stilled by blows and cruel kicks. There was no escape. In a few short minutes, modesty, which had been drilled into us by generations of parents and educators, became a thing of the past. The many women, young and old, ugly and beautiful, undernourished and well-fed, stood defenseless, naked, in a row, exposing their bodies to the curious, hungry eyes of the perverted, depraved thugs who represented Germany's pride. The floor was littered with dresses, coats, underwear, and many lovely things so essential to true femininity. The workers picked up the shoes, stockings, clothes, and hurried with them to the stockrooms to sort them and put them in their places. When we entered the second room, we had nothing left of our former identity except our naked bodies and disturbed souls. This room was noisier than the first one, manned by SS women who directed the ruthless, disfiguring work done by prisoners. There were dirty, low stools along the walls, and the naked women had to sit down on them, with their backs toward the room, waiting for the next indignity to be inflicted upon them. A moment later we felt the heavy, blunt shears in our hair, and when we looked up again, we hardly knew one another any longer. The floor was covered with clouds of silky hair, blonde, dark, red, smooth, wavy, short, long, but our heads had acquired a nightmarish appearance, cropped close by unskilled hands, so horrible to look at that we did not know whether to laugh or to cry. There lay the crown of our female beauty, our hair, to be shipped to Germany for use in the important war industries. The next room was filled with a burning acid smell, which made us cry before we even knew what was going to happen to us. The workers smeared on our bodies some strong, smelly liquid, allegedly against lice, which burned our sores into our skin and inflicted an excruciating pain on our freshly cropped heads. We had nothing to dry our tears with, and the SS men and women were greatly amused by our flowing tears. The room after this was the shower room. It was so crowded that we could hardly move, and innumerable blows and kicks pressed us even closer together to make room for more women waiting outside. The cold water felt wonderful on our bodies, reminding us of our past, when bathrooms and showers were integral parts of our life and water supply was unlimited. But we were given no time to enjoy the blessing of fresh water. Quickly, we had to leave the room to go, still wet and shivering, into the next one, where we were to obtain our prison garb. Long after this first day had become a memory, after weeks and months spent in cold and hunger on the dirty boards of the barracks, I was still trying to figure out the reason for the refined cruelty of our captors. There were mountains of clothes in the warehouses of Auschwitz, the clothes of the murdered victims, our own clothes, the clothes we brought along with us, yet we were given rags. And what horrible, filthy rags. First we were given a coarse linen shirt, dirty, torn, very old. Then came the dress, if it could be called that. One had to see and wear those dresses to be able to believe that such things really existed. Some were in loud colors, some black. They were made of tulle, silk, or velvet. Mostly they were old party dresses, now dirty, torn, completely useless. Some consisted of a silk or velvet bodice attached to a short, narrow cotton skirt which barely covered the knees. There were old army trousers sewn together with a red silk blouse and long tulle dance skirts with a tight, heavy old tweed bodice. Everything was filthy and full of lice, and none of it fitted us, as they had deliberately given clothes too small or too big to everybody. The back of the garment had a big red cross painted on it, extending from the neck all the way to the hem. We put them on quickly because we were cold, and then hurried to get a pair of shoes for our freezing feet. The lucky ones got real shoes. But most of us were given a pair of Dutch wooden shoes, which later broke the skin of our feet and caused severe infections. These infections were reason enough to be sent to the crematory, and this is why we were given them in the first place. But even those who received real shoes were to pay heavily for the privilege. The SS men and women were careful never to give a whole pair to anyone. If one of the shoes was a woman's shoe, the victim received a man's shoe for her other foot. If the right shoe was a white sneaker, she was given a high-heeled dance slipper for her left foot. The color, the style, the material was never the same for both feet, because if it had been, it could have saved the victim from the crematory, and that was not what the Nazis wanted. When we finally emerged at the other end of the beauty parlor building, the street looked like a ghost carnival. Sisters, friends did not recognize each other any longer, and the prettiest girls and most beautiful women looked like a bunch of grisly monsters, ridiculous and subhuman. The clothes we received the first day had to cover our bodies for many long months to come. The cold, the heat, the rain, the snow left their marks on them. They grew thinner and more ragged all the time until they hardly afforded any protection at all. Lice made their home in the folds, and they were stained with blood and pus coming from the infected sores which covered our bodies. We worked and slept and ate and stood roll call in them and wore them to the entrance of the crematory, where they were ripped off our bodies to clothe the next group of new arrivals. And all the time the warehouses of Auschwitz were full of the best, most expensive clothes, and the SS women walked among us in brilliant silk dresses, warm coats, their hair newly waved, fragrant with good soap and perfume, laughing at us, torturing us, and deciding which of us should die, which of us should live. Auschwitz treasure trove, Ulika Farkas. Those who ever believed that organized murder served only to satisfy Nazi perversion would have certainly changed their minds had they spent one day in the stockrooms attached to the crematories of Auschwitz. There was not one single item on the European market, be it foodstuffs, household goods, luxury articles, cosmetics, tools, or dress materials that could not be found in large quantities in those stockrooms. No, Auschwitz was not only a playground for perverts, it was also a treasure trove which supplied the German civilians with everything their hearts desired. A detachment of 200 prisoners was assigned to the crematory. It was their duty to separate the different kinds of articles and place them on the numerous shelves lining the walls of the huge buildings. Whoever was sent to work there knew that his days were numbered. After 8 to 10 weeks of this heartbreaking activity, they were shot and thrown into the flames. There were shelves and shelves heavy with blankets of all kinds, beautiful silken ones, woolen ones, feather beds, and lovely colorful quilts. There were shelves full of canned meat, vegetables, fruit, and sweets. There were large metal boxes full of the most expensive medical instruments and indescribable riches of drugs which could have saved our lives if we had only been able to put our hands on them. When the ghettos of the various European countries were evacuated, the inhabitants had no idea where they were being taken. As every member of the family was permitted to take 15 pounds of luggage with him, everyone took what he valued most or what he thought would most be needed. Doctors were told to bring their instruments, as they would be permitted to practice their profession among the Jews. This is how I happened to bring along my best instruments and most expensive drugs, which were taken away from me as I entered the gates of Auschwitz. In addition to what we were permitted to take, each of us tried to smuggle in something hidden in our clothes, sewed into the lining of our coats, so as to have something to sell, something to give away should our life depend on our capacity to bribe. While doing an errand near the crematory one day, I went into the stockroom reserved for children's clothes. Old prisoners were working here, separating the boys' clothes from the girls' clothes, shoes from stockings, underwear from dresses, and the various types of toys from one another to pack them all in Red Cross packages and send them to Germany to clothe and amuse the children of the good Nazis. One of the prisoners working there, an 18-year-old French girl, Jeanette, could stand this life no longer, and with a piece of glass found on the ground she cut the veins on both arms. She collapsed, bleeding, and I hurried to bandage her arm so as to save her life if possible, although she probably would have been better off dead. To ease her position, I grabbed a small girl's coat lying nearby and put it under Jeanette's head. As I turned the coat inside out, I saw a white label sewn into its lining. I am Ulrika Farkas, age 5. My father is Desider Farkas from Maramos, Ziget. The white label of this fine light blue coat had a long story to tell. It told me of a blonde, blue-eyed little girl, the pride and happiness of her parents, who was one day picked up by cruel Nazi hands and thrown into a cattle car, together with her father and mother. During the long trip to Auschwitz, little Ulrika was hungry and thirsty. She cried bitterly in her mother's arms, asking for her soft bed, her warm milk, for a tender word of comfort and love. But mother had lost her power to comfort her child. She could do nothing but hold her close to her heart, stroke the soft blonde hair, and kiss the tear-filled eyes. And even that not for long. After 8 days, the journey came to an end at the gates of Auschwitz. Ulrika was torn from her mother's arms, undressed, and thrown into a ditch to be burned alive together with hundreds and hundreds of little boys and girls. Her mother was spared the torture of remembering her child's fate. She went straight to the gas chambers and found forgetfulness at the merciful hands of death. And now this little blue coat waited to be sent to Germany to clothe another blue-eyed child, perhaps the daughter of her Nazi murderer. The shelves holding boys' clothing had another story to tell. When we first arrived at Auschwitz, children under 16, whether boys or girls, were permitted to accompany their mothers to the women's camps. Then, as usual, there came a counter-order, and all children of 14, 15, and 16 had to come forward because they were going to be put into a separate children's camp and receive double bread rations. Gymnastics teachers were told to come forward too. They would go with the children and teach them physical culture. We were happy. We thought that the children would be used for work and thus escape the unavoidable death by starvation, disease, or burning which awaited them in Auschwitz. The boys left first. They were kept in a camp near ours, and we were able to watch them exercise from morning till night, tired, weak, and thin, without the double bread ration they were promised. Then one night, the most horrible screams woke up our camp from its death-like sleep. We ran to the entrance of the camp and witnessed a sight I shall never forget as long as I live. Several black trucks were standing before the entrance of the boys' camp, and a detachment of SS men were throwing the naked, crying, screaming little boys on the trucks. Those who tried to escape were dragged back by the hair, beaten with truncheons, and whipped mercilessly. There was no help, no escape. Neither their mothers nor God could reach out a helping hand to save their lives. They were burned alive in those crematories, which killed and smoked incessantly, day and night. First they had to exercise to become stronger and more beautiful, and then they were all murdered in one single night. Why? Can anyone answer why? A few days later I had some work to do in the barracks where those children had lived. There, on the thin plank walls, they had written their names and the story of their lives with their own blood, and a last goodbye. They knew they were to die. They knew they were to be burned, young, innocent, the victims of a world whose conscience shall never rest for having permitted those monstrous crimes.